Hello. 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 Hi, my name is Brian Lachlan. I'm the head of real estate at Expat Hub here in Tbilisi, Georgia. Today, I'd like to speak a little bit about the Airbnb market in Tbilisi this year, 2025, Hi, my and name is how to Brian Lachlan. strategize and take a look at the market in general. Um, Tbilisi's Airbnb market has matured. It's no longer about getting in early, but it's about buying intelligently. The pre-COVID days, where it was like throwing a dart at a dartboard and finding a decent property, those days are over. So we'd like to ask the question today. A lot of people are asking in the market at the moment whether Airbnb is still worth it, and for whom it might be worth it. Like I said, the market has matured. A lot of new hotels have been built. There's a lot more capacity has come online. However, it is still worth it if you are very, very savvy about the location, about the building type, and about your property apartment presentation. It's extremely important that you stay within very, very, very central districts. Next slide. The evolution of Tbilisi's Airbnb market, I suppose, really got very hot about 7 or 8 years ago when Tbilisi started to become very popular for tourism and for the expat digital nomad market, and word went around of what a fantastic place it is, great food, great weather, etc., etc. However, there were a large amount of government initiatives that helped. There was visa-free access. Property was very, very affordable. The central districts are extremely walkable, and there was no real zoning laws or regulations around Airbnb properties. By 2022, we were over 12,000 active listings, and now here we are in 2025, and people are wondering, does it still work? So we'd like to go a little bit more, next slide please, a little bit more into the market dynamics and what really drives the market. Obviously supply, professional management, platform algorithms, and currency stability. Can your approach outperform the market? This is the question. You need to be professional and you need to be strategic about how you approach this market. It's not a long-term rental investment. It's a short-term rental investment, which requires more attention, and it requires a slightly different strategy. The very, very strong, very dead central districts of Tbilisi are the only districts where you will have year-round occupancy and year-round good pricing. When you move out of those very central districts, you still are in what are considered to be central districts, the likes of Vaque, Sabortalo, Avlabari, etc. However, these districts will not give you the occupancy nor the pricing in the winter time, and are more advisable for long-term letting opportunities. What can hurt you and what can fail is you can overprice, you could manage them poorly, and you can ignore the location and you can ignore the logistics. These are very, very important considerations. This brings us really, I think, now to the yield. Next slide, please. There is, for the non-savvy, non-professional investor, there's sometimes a little bit confusion around what is a yield, and the difference between a gross yield, the difference between a gross yield and net yield, and I'd like to bring ROI into the equation as well. Sometimes people come to us and they say, yes, I've heard of this development and the developer is advertising a 20% ROI. Now, what that ROI generally is made up of is projected gross yield plus a projected capital appreciation. So you could have a projected 10% gross yield and a projected 10% capital appreciation, and the marketing and advertising says a 20% return on investment. And a lot of the times this is, like I said, it is just advertising, it is just marketing. So the gross yield on purchasing a property is the annual projected rental income over the property price divided by the property price times 100. The net yield is the annual rental income minus your annual expenses divided by the property price multiplied by 100. Now, what makes a good yield in Tbilisi at the moment for Airbnbs? For Airbnbs, a good yield is 12% gross. And by the time you net that back, it becomes somewhere between 5 and 7%, depending on the size of your annual expenses. And how can you test a property? So you've got a property and you're thinking, potentially, I'd like to test and understand what kind of a yield I may be able to get from a particular property. Firstly, you need to get comps. You need comparisons from the major short-term letting websites like Airbnb, like Booking.com. I would try to book properties at various times of the year, comparable properties to the property that you're interested in purchasing. Try to book properties at various times of the year. What are the daily rates? What are the prices? And what does the occupancy level look like? I mean, are they fully booked? It's now 27th of November 2025. Try to book something for next, say, high season next July and August. What does the occupancy level look like? What does it look like for every month for the next 7 or 8 months? Are they fully booked or are they almost empty? Your figures and your projections should be based on realistic occupancy levels and prices. This is not a wish list where you wish you had full occupancy or you wish you could get certain prices. You need to test the market. Next, I would look at comparable properties for sale compared to the one you're interested in to get realistic property purchase prices. In this way, you can then confidently, methodically work out realistic yields and what you're looking at. The other variables you really need to think about are the size of the expenses. Management fees. If you're using a short-term, an Airbnb, if you like, or a short-term, specialist short-term letting management company, generally they're charging between 20 and 25% of your gross rent. And that needs to be included in your expenses. Other variables that are very, very important are the reviews. You will live and die by your reviews. On Airbnb, you need to be a super host. It's only with these reviews and with this super host listing that you can increase your occupancy levels in wintertime, and you can charge premium prices in the high summertime, and you can charge realistic prices in the off season in the wintertime. Next slide. When you approach purchasing an Airbnb property in Tbilisi, you need to think like a Westerner. You need to think like a tourist. There's no point in if I'm speaking to people out there who have lived in Tbilisi for 10 years and they're going to do it in the Georgian way. Yes, in terms of styling, characteristics of the property, there's a certain amount you can do in terms of styling it in the Georgian way. However, you need to think like a tourist and a Western guest. So you need to understand that a large amount of flights come into the country in the early morning, 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. The property that you're purchasing, you need to consider yourself as a tourist who has flown into the airport at 4 o'clock in the morning. And what does your property look like? What is their first impressions at 4 a.m. in the morning when it's dark? Is the building entrance clean? Is it lit? Are the streets navigable at night? Would a late arriving guest feel safe and impressed? And these are extremely important for short-term lettings. The aesthetics, the safety, and the guest experience will directly influence your yield and the reviews. Your pricing, like I said already, your pricing and your occupancy levels live and die by your reviews. So it's very important to research the market, find a good letting company, a good management company that specializes in short-term lettings. And just a note on those companies, you need to do a lot of research because bigger is not always better. And you want those who have a portfolio of properties with high ratings, and you need to go and test those ratings and test those reviews. Next slide, please. So an important pointers, I think, is you really do need to think strategically when you are purchasing the property. If you had to resell or pivot the investment, that's this property purchase, to a long-term rental, what criteria would you be looking for in the property when you purchase it? The reason I'm saying this is that those who are purchasing in Airbnb and short-term letting type properties are generally in very high tourist areas. If there was, for some reason, to be a downturn in tourism, if there was to be another set of lockdowns like we experienced in 2020 and the tourism industry worldwide collapsed, what are you left with? Can you pivot your property at that point, if something like that was to happen, easily into a long-term letting or into a buy to live if you were looking to sell it? So the point I'm making is that when you purchase it, you need to think in terms of, if you needed to exit, how liquid is my property? Is the property you're purchasing, does it have good accessibility? So for instance, families with young children or elderly, is it easy for them to access? Are there multiple stairways with no elevators? I would also think in terms of the sweet spot in Airbnbs is usually studios or one-bed properties. However, for long letting, a 35-meter one-bed apartment will always be more in demand and will command a higher price than a 35 square meter studio. This is true for both renting, long-term renting, and for the purchasing market. And it's a very important consideration if you may want to pivot to the long-term rental market. So always think about, when you're purchasing, think about, if I needed to sell this, how will it appeal to the broadest or the widest amount of the purchase market? And just because you love something, it doesn't mean that everyone will. So you need to put on a lot of hats, and you need to think in terms of appealing to the widest and broadest size of the market. Secondly, if you had to sell that property after purchasing it, so would you be able to sell that property for the same price you bought it for 1 month after purchasing? If not, then if you can't confidently say yes to that question, then really you shouldn't be purchasing it, because why would somebody else purchase it if you're not going to? And lastly, do not be taken in by cosmetics. You need to understand, is the building structurally sound? A lot of the central districts of Tbilisi and around Sololaki, they're beautiful, cute, vintage type apartments, and they look cute, but when you're spending a considerable amount on a purchase, you need to make sure that it is structurally sound, not just cute and beautiful. And it's got good interior decoration. You need to look beneath the cosmetics to understand how it really is. I mean, there's hundreds of cute vintage properties that look great, but they may cost a lot to maintain. Next slide, please. So I suppose, looking at a strategic takeaway then at this point, really when you're talking about Airbnb short-term letting, you need to treat it as a structured asset, not a side hustle. It is not passive income unless you have a very, very, very good management company on board. Otherwise, it is going to take work and it's going to take your time. So invest, if you can, invest in professional management company to look after it for you. Make sure that that management company is using dynamic pricing and listing across platforms, and not just listing on Airbnb and booking.com. They need to be on Expedia, and you need to understand that a large amount of the tourism into Tbilisi is not just coming from the West. It's also coming from Russian-speaking states, and it's also coming from the Middle East and Turkey. And you need to make sure that you're listed on those on the booking sites that tourists from these countries use. In terms of dynamic pricing, at certain times of the year, high summer, Christmas, you should be charging a very high amounts. you need to look at the calendar of major events coming into the city. So big sporting events, big music events, big expos, etc., etc. And this is these weekends or these weeks. They might be on shoulder months like March, April, or October, November, but these are weeks that will help your pricing, and you need to increase your prices to make sure that you're availing of the demand that is there. You should be charging high premiums for these dates. It's very important. So focus on reliability, not novelty, and consistency now outperforms creativity. So that's really a snapshot of the Airbnb market in Georgia at the moment. Yes, there's opportunity there, but you need to be very intelligent and strategic about how you carry it out. Thank you. And if there are any questions, I will take them now.
We have a question from the chat asking if I had to start with Airbnb in Tbilisi, what would you recommend my next steps be? I mean, I guess in general, I guess they're asking what, like, if they had to start tomorrow, what would you recommend they do? How should they go about this? So sorry about that. If we, question is, if we had to start tomorrow with Airbnb in Tbilisi, what would you recommend my next steps be? I guess they're asking what should they do if like someone just wanted to jump in the market tomorrow, like how should they proceed with this?
Number one is be patient. Take your time and do as much research as you possibly can. Back to one of the original points I made in the presentation is to do the research on comparable properties, both comparable properties that you're looking to purchase and the districts that you're looking to purchase in. You need to be very, very, very central. It needs to be as central as possible around the old town, Sololaki. Think about where tourists hang out, where the major sites are. So Sololaki, Tatsminda, Rustaveli Avenue area, and maybe across the river in Marginishvili, Chugoretti, but only as close to the river as you possibly can be. Then you need to think in terms of if you're focusing on a particular property, you've done viewings, you like the look of the property, etc., then a lot of hard work starts. Then you need to make research on the short-term letting websites about how much a similar property is making, and you need to work out your yield before you make any kind of a jump into the unknown. At that point, if you're happy with the property, you're confident that it'll work on Airbnb, then you need to go down the inspection route, and you need to make sure you've got a good property inspection done on the property to understand that it is structurally sound. And I would even take advice from some of the short-term letting management companies on what do they think. There are some of those companies that will only take properties on their books for the very, very, very central areas. Does that answer your question? Other than that, you need to look in terms of taxation and what it's going to cost in terms of your annual expenses. You've got an annual property tax to pay. You're going to have rental income tax to pay on your income. You're going to have maintenance costs. You're going to have the rental company costs too. So you really do need to break down your expenses and work out what your net yield is going to be. And then you need to make a judgment call based on your own risk appetite or what you expect to make as a percentage each year as to whether it's worth it to you or not. Those making the really good money and very successful in Tbilisi at the moment are those who have managed and worked their way up from a small property up to having a portfolio or 5-6 properties, and they know what's right. You don't go too fancy on the inside. You keep things clean as possible, almost Scandinavian. But your reviews are all important. Reviews. So if you're looking at if you're doing that research on comparable properties, what do all those with high reviews, what do they have in common? And this is where you're really trying to understand and tick all the boxes as regards what your property should be. Does that answer your question?
I hope it does answer the question. I have a question actually. Do you have any horror stories from people who have like they've come to Tbilisi, they see the city as like the land of milk and honey, and they buy the first property ever. But for example, they buy something in, I don't know, just outside Avlabari or further down along like Moscow Avenue or towards the airport, and then they're suddenly like panicking. They're not renting because they thought it was a cheap price. They thought it was close to the city. Have you seen something like this where people kind of just view Georgia as easy to start Airbnb, but then they discover all the nuances that come with working in the Georgian market?
It happens all the time, but I don't think that's necessarily unique to the Georgian market. I'm sure the same happens in capital cities all over the world. People get emotionally involved in a decision, and they go, "Yes, I want to invest in such and such a city," and they are seeing the prices in that city as really cheap because maybe they're coming from, London or Paris or something like that. But just because it's cheap compared to London or Paris, it doesn't make it cheap for Tbilisi. Generally, the biggest mistake people make is rushing into something. They see something that they think is too good to be true. They throw money at it, don't do the right research, maybe even don't do the right due diligence on the property. I mean, I've stories of people who have purchased in the old buildings and properties here known as Tbilisi, or Italian yards are known as, where it's like it's a shared yard to a laneway entrance, and then they're beautiful looking if they're done right. It's kind of a two-story kind of a courtyard setup, and they viewed it on a particular day at a particular time, only to realize after they bought it that their neighbor has 5 dogs, or that somebody on the ground floor there opens his garage and brings all his cars out into the yard and works on them during the day, etc., etc. So, but it's true when you're purchasing anywhere in the world. You need to be intelligent about it. A potential property, you need to visit it at night time, in the morning, at the weekend, during the week. You need to understand it at different times so that you're not just seeing it just there and then. And you need to do multiple viewings, because it's very difficult and it's very rare that people see everything on their first viewing. Because if it's something they like, their emotional and their heartstrings pull on them that they really want it, but they maybe haven't seen that, a couple of the windows don't open properly, or the wall isn't straight, or the floor isn't straight, and it may have other problems with communications, or what is known here as communications, which is water, gas, and electricity, which all need to be tested as part of a property inspection. So you need to get as much objective, independent advice as properly, aside from the normal due diligence and contract due diligence, and making sure that the purchases that you are protected in the purchase agreements, all of that. Another, choices or decisions that people make is that just they simply overpay, and they can't sell it for the same price they bought it for. And I know of stories of people who have bought something for 400,000 that was only worth 200,000. But that's an extreme case. But there are a lot of cases of people who have bought at 150, 160,000, only to realize that it's actually only worth 110 or 120,000 sometime after they purchased it.
I think you're touching some interesting points there, especially with the property inspection for one, because straight walls aside, I definitely don't think this is something which people in the West would, at least Western markets would have so much. Living in anyone who's lived in Tbilisi, you can know that sometimes a building is a little bit more crooked. So that is something I think definitely people probably look
You
over.
see, sorry to interrupt you, yeah, but it's not something that's unique to Tbilisi. I mean, you go to Amsterdam and you see buildings that aren't particularly straight. I mean, the point I'm making here is just because a wall is not straight, it doesn't mean it's not safe, or a floor is not straight. It doesn't mean it's not safe. But it does indicate that it needs an inspection. And it could be that in the case of a floor, it could be that the ceiling joists are in poor condition. The ceiling joists underneath the floor for the floor below are in poor condition and need to be replaced. But what I'm saying is that a property inspection will highlight the red flags for you. It would also say things like, yes, but it's safe. This is just characteristic of this type of property. So it's not a red flag for you. But there would other ones would look at it, or it could be a health and safety issue. It could be, and not just health and safety. It can cost you a lot of money in maintenance. And I suppose another point to go into is the status of a lot of these much older buildings. A lot of them do have heritage status here in Tbilisi, and you can have some purchasers who think that that's an amazing thing. It has heritage status, so wow. But these means that they are very, very highly protected by the government. And there are different levels of heritage status, and these are listed quite clearly on the property extracts for the property. But something that is highly protected by the government. I mean, I know of properties over on Saarbrücken Square, older type properties, both boutique, large enough to be boutique hotels, listed as heritage properties, but the listing is so strong that they're not even permitted to paint the exterior window frames without permission. And that would mean a visit by the government authorities to give them the okay to allow them to paint their own window frames. So the recommendation there is from me is to go with, yes, older, cute buildings, fantastic, wonderful, but heritage status generally is not something that you should be actively looking for. It's probably better that it's old, but it doesn't have heritage status. In that way, you don't encounter the same bureaucracy or the government interference when you want to do alterations or changes to the property.
You were talking about earlier that someone paid 400,000 for a $200,000 apartment as an extreme case, but then also people who paid what, 50 grand more than they should have.
Mm.
What's the, I mean, again, this can be the property market all over, but let's keep it to Georgia specifically. Like, what is the deal with that? How does someone overpay? All right, 50 grand I can get, but how does someone get to like such a high level of 200 grand over, and what are the causes of this?
Profiteering and people taking advantage of them, local agents, local companies. You need reliable partners, and there is independent advice in that situation. What they should have done is they should have gotten an independent evaluation done of the property. There are a list of 200 or 300 government accredited property valuators. These evaluations are used for instance, for the residency programs, to value properties. Now, oftentimes, in fact, most of the times, that valuation comes in below the market price of the property. So, for instance, you've got your eye on a property and you're looking to pay 120,000 for it, and it's advertised as 125, and you've negotiated, let's say, for instance, to 120,000. Before you sign any deposit or pre-purchase agreement, get a government evaluation, get an independent evaluation done. It doesn't cost much. It's about 90, 98, 100 lari. You get the value back within 24 hours, and that will give you that valuation. Now, these independent valuations, they value only on district, building quality, and the size, the square meter of the property, and then they would make comparisons in the local area to that, and that is the value that they would come up with. They don't generally value fixtures and fittings. So if your property you're looking at has Italian chandeliers and hand painted Spanish tiles, that's not included in their valuation, but these are extras that you would pay for in a market valuation. So the point I'm making is that it's not uncommon for you to be paying or to agreeing 120,000, and the independent valuation comes in at 110,000. In that case, I would say no, you're not necessarily getting scammed. Not at all. In fact, that's probably about right, if you like. But if you're paying 200,000 for something and the valuation comes in at 120 or 130,000, then I get a second opinion on the valuation. I get another valuation to take a look at it. And if it agreed with the first one, then there's a reason why you're overpaying, and you're overpaying big time. Now, there is, however, third type of valuation that you do here in the market here, and that's a bank's valuation. So when you're looking for a mortgage here and you choose a property and you go to the bank and you say, I want to purchase this property, but can I get a mortgage on it? The bank firstly send out one of their people, a valuer, to look over the property, and they come back with the value. Now, they always come in on the prudent. It's almost the bank would be if you like, a liquidation value. So there's almost there are three different levels of evaluation, in the market. There's the market value, which is the price you might pay. Then there's the independent valuation done by one of the government accredited evaluators. And then below that again, there will be a bank valuation. So if the independent valuation is within 10% of what you're paying, you're probably okay. You're not being scammed. But if it's 20, 30, 40, 50%, then you are being scammed. So to safeguard against this kind of scamming, I think there I've outlined how to prevent it, or at least to be aware of it.
Cool. I think that's it for all questions. So yeah, thank you very much everybody for watching. Thank you, Brian, and yeah, a good one.
Thank you very much.